I know that it is generally in bad taste for anyone to speak of his own motives. I always tried to be wise as the serpent, but harmless as the dove.
His home was his Southern-style estate known as Wheatland, from which he launched his political assault on the high office. He was from the same generation as Martin Van Buren, learned and ambitious and possessing an extraordinary memory. He was also stiff and utterly humorless. One friend said, "I do not think he ever uttered a genuine witticism in his life." His grim nature could be traced in part to a terrible tragedy he had suffered as a young man. He had been engaged to Anne Coleman, a young woman from one of the wealthiest families in the country. But in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, she heard rumors that he was interested in her only for her money. She angrily broke off the engagement and then apparently committed suicide. Buchanan was stunned. He was banned from the funeral and ostracized by his townspeople. And from then on, he became overly cautious in everything he did. To fill the void in his life, Buchanan threw himself into politics. He was elected 5 times to the House of Representatives, where he shifted political parties and became a Democrat. He served overseas as his country's foreign minister to Russia. And back in Washington, he also served in the U.S. Senate. Living a bachelor's life, he shared boarding house rooms with Southern politicians who helped shape his own sympathies. In 1845, he was named Secretary of State by James K. Polk, but he detested the job. But no one challenged the fact that he was a masterful politician. And after serving 4 years as minister to England, Buchanan was hailed as the only candidate who could hold the country together, as civil war now loomed as a real probability. In Washington, construction was underway on a new Capitol building, and in its shadow, James Buchanan was inaugurated the country's 15th president. What America needed most in 1857 was a president who could boldly face the nation's problems and help bridge the widening chasm between North and South. But from the start, Buchanan proved he was not up to the challenge.
How easy it would be for the American people to settle the slavery question forever. All that is necessary is to let it alone.
Mr. Buchanan, as a national Democrat, was always sympathetic toward the South. I think he shared with the Southerners a fury at the Northern abolitionists who were a minority stirring up trouble from his point of view. I think he was a man carried out of his depth, out of the depth of normal politics, by the intensity of emotion that was beginning to be felt both North and South. And those emotions and the activists who held them created a polarization that pulled the rest of the country along and apart. I don't know what Buchanan could have done to bridge the emerging gap. Some gaps are too big for politics.
As president-elect, Buchanan had made a damaging mistake. He had secretly and improperly contacted Supreme Court Justice Robert Greer of Pennsylvania and convinced him to vote the pro-slavery line in the Dred Scott case. It was the work of a cunning politician, but it backfired. Though the court now ruled that slavery was indeed protected by the Constitution in all territories, the decision virtually ensured that there would be civil war. Buchanan also backed a pro-slavery state government in Kansas, which resulted in bloody fighting. He was criticized for trying to shove slavery down the nation's throat. On October 17, 1859, abolitionist John Brown seized the federal arsenal at Harper's Ferry, Virginia, and called for a massive slave uprising. Although the revolt was put down by federal troops, John Brown, through his capture, trial, and execution, ignited the land.
On the day of Brown's execution, bells were tolled in many places in the North as if he were a martyr. This inflamed the Southern mind with intense hostility against the North and enabled the disunion agitators to prepare it for the final catastrophe.
All Buchanan wanted was to get safely out of office, and he declined to run for a second term. But when he refused to support the leading Democratic candidate for president, Stephen A. Douglas, he virtually handed the election to Abraham Lincoln, and thereby set secession into motion.
From December 1860 until March 4, 1861, was by far the most important period of my administration. No public man was ever placed in a more trying and responsible position.
Believing he had no constitutional power to oppose secession, Buchanan remained paralyzed, unwilling to try and save the Union. As Civil War marched steadily closer, it was charged that he was deliberately harboring traitors within his own government. And his Secretary of War, John B. Floyd of Virginia, was accused of shipping arms from northern arsenals to the South.
It is true that Floyd made the attempt, but I arrested the order before a single gun was sent.
On December 20th, 1860, South Carolina seceded from the Union. Buchanan threw up his hands and said there was nothing more he could do. From this point on, Congress ignored his leadership.
Mr. Buchanan was a total failure. He could have succeeded only in the degree that he could have made plain to both Northerners and Southerners the terrible character of the war that was approaching. And he did not. He presumably could not grasp it himself. Oh, his imagination wasn't up to it. And certainly his oratory wasn't up to it. His physical strength wasn't up to it. He failed, thus, a severe test at a severe time. His tragedy, and I think it was a tragedy, is that he found himself at the end of his term presiding over the beginnings of the dissolution of the Union, powerless to stop it. But had he been a stronger man or a luckier man, I don't think it would have made a substantial difference. I'm afraid I think it was an irrepressible conflict.
In the end, he was vilified, considered a traitor by both North and South. His portrait, hanging in the Capitol Rotunda, had to be taken down to prevent it from being defaced.
When I parted from the executive mansion, I said to President Lincoln, "If you are as happy, my dear sir, on entering this house as I am in leaving it and returning home, you're the happiest man in the country."
As Civil War erupted, James Buchanan went home to his Pennsylvania plantation. History would label him as cowardly, weak, senile, and vacillating. What he was a lonely, limited man who mistook politics for statesmanship.
The presidency, although a crown of honor far more glorious than that of any monarch in Christendom, is also a crown of thorns. I shall carry to my grave the consciousness that I at least meant well for my country.